We were astonished that metal ships could burn with such fury, but she didn't die easily. At dawn, she was still smouldering, but mangled beyond salvation. That morning, someone remarked, "This is like the wrong end of Skittle Alley." Soon, it became Bomb Alley. HMS Antelope broke and sank. 2 more men were dead. The next day, Tuesday, the 25th of May, while we braced ourselves for another onslaught, at the other end of the island in Port Stanley, Argentine troops were celebrating their Independence Day.
Festejamos nuevamente la fecha patria.
At Government House, General Menendez, the commander of the Argentine troops on the islands, had sent a message home as soon as he heard that British troops had landed. Be assured, he told President Galtieri, that all the men are fighting well and their combat morale is high. And so, at the start at least, was discipline.
Subordinación y valor.
In Port Stanley Harbour, Argentina's naval strength, in the shape of the gunboats Islas Malvinas, had already been damaged. In fact, because of the British naval blockade, the Argentine Navy had so far played virtually no part in the war. As far as his troops were concerned, General Menendez decided first of all to concentrate his efforts round his headquarters in Port Stanley. By now, he had about 12,000 men on the islands. He knew the British would have nothing like that number, and anyway, he was expecting the main attack to come against Stanley itself. In the first few days after the invasion, among the Argentine troops, there was a good deal of complacency. The one sizable troop movement the Argentines made was to send several hundred men to reinforce the 1,000-strong garrison at Goose Green, the settlement with a small airstrip about 50 miles from Stanley. The idea was to cut off the British advance before it got underway. The majority of the Argentine fighting troops on the islands were conscripts, in training, physical fitness, will to win, no match for the British. But there was one group of Argentine military who were on a level with their British counterparts, at least in terms of bravery, the Argentine Air Force pilots. From their bases in Argentina, the pilots flew hundreds of missions against the task force, and from the beginning their losses were huge. Many brought down by Harrier Sidewinder missiles, most though by ground and ship-based missiles and general anti-aircraft fire. Apart from those shot down, the Argentines admit to a figure of 34, the British put it at more than twice that. The pilots were also troubled by the blockade and say that 261 flights had to turn back because of it. Nevertheless, In the first few days of the invasion, they'd had considerable success. By the time the conflict was over, they were to have damaged, in one way or another, 3/4 of the British fighting ships around the Falklands. And it could have been much worse if the bombs they carried had been properly fused. Many didn't go off even when they hit their targets, and hit they did, accurately and often.
Y comienzan las operaciones aéreas, es decir, comienzan por lo menos frente a nuestras cámaras. A4B, carreteando y saliendo, suponemos que hacia la zona de Malvinas.
Tuesday, Independence Day, Argentina launched another major airstrike. The British commanders had seriously underestimated the Argentine Air Force, committing its planes and its pilots with an almost reckless willingness. In San Carlos Bay, the helicopters ducked into the hillsides, using their color as camouflage. But this time, the main attack was against the fleet at sea. The container ship Atlantic Conveyor had joined up with the main task force before sailing on to San Carlos Bay with her cargo. Exocets launched against the carriers, destroyed her instead. She'd been carrying helicopters badly needed by the landing forces. It was a serious blow. 12 men dead. The same day, HMS Coventry, sister ship to the Sheffield, was bombed and sank within an hour. 19 dead. But the Argentine pilots were taking heavy losses. One was shot down over Fearless and ended up bobbing in the water a few hundred yards away. A landing craft was sent to pick him up.
I got it. I got him just breaking up.
Pieces of his cockpit canopy showered down on the deck. The young gunners had their first trophy. The pilot was brought into the big dock at the back of Fearless, the ship he'd just been trying to bomb. As the medical orderlies moved in, he stopped being an enemy everyone had been trying to kill, became instead a man in pain, needing urgent treatment.
Yeah, that's what we'll do just to keep it safe for now. Right, let's get him away now.
They gave him a shot of morphine and scrawled a big M on his forehead to prevent overdosing.
cold.
The Argentine pilots impressed everyone with their skills and a bravery that verged on foolhardy. According to this man, the squadrons were moved about in Argentina to prevent them knowing the losses. And they weren't told about the weight of the anti-aircraft fire, nor the success of the Sea Harriers in intercepting. About half of them were not coming back.
Hey Arnie, he has a little orange neck thing that he's very fond of, doesn't want to lose it. Green fur.
He has got a complete fore and aft dislocation of his left knee, probably rupturing some of his thigh muscle. He had a dislocated left kneecap patella bone, which I've reduced the dislocation. We've now wrapped him up. He's got a nasty lot of bleeding around the joint. He will probably be in plaster for 2 to 3 months, I think, at the minimum, if they don't operate on him immediately.
What's going to happen to him now?
Well, I believe he'll be very lucky if he's flying jet aircraft again, but of course his skills are such that he may well be able to fly non-jet aircraft. I suspect, you see, that he did that ejecting through the hatchway of the canopy of the aircraft.
Air raid warning red. Air raid warning red.
And will you be keeping him here? Or?
No, he is going to be taken ashore in due course. After a few minutes, we will organise a helicopter for that.
Thank you. Well, we better get up and see what's happening.
Yes, I'm sorry that we've got to camouflage ourselves again, but that's the way of the thing.
The Argentine planes were still being hacked out of the sky. Watch the one in the background. One day it was our turn to be caught in a helicopter during an air raid. Two of the Skyhawks turned our way, and we thought they'd attack us. But they sped by 100 yards off, exposing us not to their guns, but our own, firing at them. There was now a trickle of prisoners coming back to the ships. Blindfolded, they'd been confused by travel in helicopters and boats before being unmasked in the half-light below deck in Fearless. Low red lighting was used anywhere it might spill out into the open. White light would give away the ship's position after dark. The ship's commander was anxious lest souvenir hunters steal any of his captives' belongings.
That's got to be all stone. Cookie as well, right? Where's my money?
Get that Marine in the ferry to come over there. It's talking now. Take charge of it. Take it up to the brigade interim, the back of the gun. Starts.
Yeah. Okay.
Well done, Phil.
Okay.
The British were now beginning to distinguish between their opponents, the officers and the NCOs, as tough and professional as the British Army.
Where are you from? You speak English?
And the conscript soldiers, plucked from country villages, pressed into a war they didn't want. By now the beachhead was established. 12,000 tons of stores, enough to keep the brigade going for a month, were on shore. They'd been unloaded by the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and the Merchant Navy. The men had worked on, despite the bombs dropping around, and sometimes through their ships, many crammed full of ammunition. They'd done their part. They'd put the army on its feet. But the ships had paid a heavy price. Now there was pressure from home to break out of the beachhead and seek a success.
Dawn action stations. Hands to dawn action stations. Assume MB City State 1, condition 0.
I'm not allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out, and I counted them all back.
Target 01, command approved.
Call for fire, 01. Engaging.
In the course of its duties within the total exclusion zone around the Falkland Islands,
bring to resurrection with all the saints the bodies of these our brothers.
The Falkland Islands are about to surrender. Negotiations will commence this evening.
Dawn stand to for the British troops from the task force, now well established at their beachhead on the Falklands. So far, apart from the repeated air attacks, opposition from Argentine troops had been slight. Just one or two isolated groups who'd quickly surrendered or fled. On East Falkland, the settlements at Douglas and Teal Inlet to the north were soon under British control. If Goose Green and Darwin to the south could also be secured, then the way to Port Stanley would be clear. To counter the plan, General Menendez ordered reinforcements to the garrison at Goose Green, bringing his strength there to 1,400 men. The British commander, General Moore, decided to attack. Argentine losses were heavy. Hundreds of men were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner.
Right. You. This way.
The fighting began at 2 a.m. on the morning of May the 29th.
Right.
BBC radio reporter Robert Fox was with the men who fought there.
The battle was begun at night. It began with a heavy naval bombardment, and you can still see the scars of that around here, an artillery bombardment, and then it was a full open battalion attack on very well dug in enemy positions. The positions were much better prepared than had been expected. There were far more enemies. When we took the surrender later, we could not believe that we had 1,000 men putting down their arms on the airfield here behind me. The attack was led by Lieutenant Colonel H. Jones, always known as H, a genial extrovert figure who led his battalion in peace and in war with the same friendly, almost abandoned manner. It was one of the most heroic attacks that a British infantry battalion has carried out since the Second World War, and the main battle lasted 14 bitter hours. I was with the battalion main headquarters throughout that battle, and if we were within a few feet of being killed from shrapnel, from shell, from mortar, from artillery, very well positioned, we were close to that 40 or 50 times. Towards the evening, the CO himself, H. Jones, was killed in an act of almost foolish bravery. he was leading a platoon attack to free his 2 companies that had been pinned down for nearly an hour by heavy machine gun fire. And as he approached a machine gun position, he was scythed down. It was a message that spread throughout the battalion. We knew that we had gained the ground. Goose green lay before us. There were white flags put up by the Argentinians, though unfortunately in some cases the white flags were shown only for young officers and NCOs to go forward, unarmed, to be shot down by another machine gunner behind the men carrying the white flags.
Goose Green was the victory the British wanted. The Argentinians had been overwhelmed, not by numbers, but by courage and resolution. The British troops had, with a single action, established a reputation for winning. The proportions of the victory were ridiculous. When the confusion cleared, 250 Argentine dead had been collected from the battlefield, 1,400 prisoners taken. They'd been defeated by a single battalion, 600 strong, whose casualties were 17 dead, 31 wounded. It was a battle which would never have taken place if the true odds had been known. After the fighting, the surrender negotiations went on through the night. At daybreak, the Paras took a final risk, using much of their ammunition in a demonstration of firepower, which left the peat and the gorse smouldering. The Argentinians gave in. The Paras had gambled and won, without even appreciating the odds against them. The field hospital back at the beachhead received the wounded. Set up in an abandoned refrigeration plant, dirty and ramshackle, it was no place to be operating. It was the best they could find.
Which one do you think's the entrance wound and entrance wound?
Entrance and exit.
Has he broken his femur?
No.
He's lucky then.
As these high-velocity missiles go through limbs, they create a lot of dead muscle, which has to be excised, because otherwise it just festers and goes gangrenous and can cause all sorts of problems. Here's another Argentinian casualty with what looks like a shrapnel wound of the leg. I think he's basically very lucky.
He's lucky?
Yes, because from what we've seen of the Argentine medical facilities, the treatment that some of our wounded casualties have had, enemy casualties, the treatment has been inadequate, to say the least. Instead of removing dead muscle, they've simply closed wounds with metal clips. And this is a recipe for disaster, as any surgeon will tell you. And as you can see, the conditions are somewhat arduous. The light is limited. We've only got a small 6-kilowatt generator outside, and fuel for that is in short supply. And the floors are not of a standard that you would expect to see even in the grounds of a hospital back home. They're very grubby, but we're dealing with fit young men who've got good resistance to infection, and they simply need this surgery to help them survive later.
There were 2 unexploded bombs lodged in the ceiling, but with nowhere else to go, the surgeons stayed. They kept on operating, even during the air raids. All the wounded got the same treatment, no matter their nationality. The other big problem was what to do with 1,400 unexpected prisoners. Once they'd laid down their arms, they had to be fed and housed and guarded. The British, short of men, tents and rations, were hard put to provide any of it. There were some Air Force men among them, but others, the technicians who'd be hard to replace, had been spirited away before the surrender, helicoptered by the Argentinians back to Port Stanley. To begin with, the captives were put into the sheep shearing pens and told to eat their own rations. Then, as helicopters became available, they were taken back to be loaded aboard ships, which would carry them home. They were mostly young conscripts, who in the main seemed pleased to be out of the war. They'd had, it seemed, a raw deal from their officers. They'd been left very much to fend for themselves. They'd been begging or stealing food from the islanders, even though there'd been plenty available from their stores. They'd also been warned that the British might shoot them. They were handed over to the military police, who took charge of them. Their apprehension was obvious. In their minds, anything could happen, no matter what it says in the Geneva Convention. But they were treated precisely as the Convention dictates. One at a time, they were stripped and searched. All their personal belongings, except their clothes, were taken away. Anything which might do harm was removed, even their bootlaces. Everything was catalogued, and they signed the list. The bags of their belongings would be returned when they were repatriated. The only labels that could be found in quantity were from the Canberra. The prisoners had arrived before they were expected. It was the proper procedure, but demoralizing, dehumanizing. The people of Goose Green were glad to see the back of them. They'd swapped one army for another, and there was no doubt which they preferred. Every soldier was a celebrity.
Well, one thing wrong, it should have been whiskey.
It's a marvellous fillip today to have had this one battalion that's taken out so many of them.
The day of the surrender, General Moore, the new Land Forces commander, arrived and had his first meeting at sea with Admiral Woodward.
First of all, what we were after was a victory ashore for one of our groups of men, battalion or whatever, that was going to prove that our guys could really do it. And my goodness, they have today.
That's right.
And yesterday. They had that considerable fight yesterday, captured 100 or so prisoners, and took the first part and surrounded the others. And then, as a result of proving their quality and their moral domination, frankly, I think that's probably the reason that the others have surrendered today. Provides us with some problems, mind you. 900 prisoners are going to take a bit of looking after.
Indeed, I wouldn't like to look after 900 prisoners.
And get them on the way, but that we can all do, can't we?
Yeah, right. Yes.
Find the means to do that.
It's the next 5,000 we want, really, isn't it?
The Argentinians had set their defences right through the village, even a rocket launcher on top of the children's slide. With all the armaments lying about, the village was a very unsafe place.
You're all right, not upset by it, eh? All right.
The little girl, Anna Robson, who's 3, was still frightened of helicopters. A lot of children had been evacuated to Goose Green from Port Stanley for their safety. It turned out to be the last place that was safe.
You're all right now, aren't you? Hey?
The villagers were concerned about the state of their houses. The whole population, swollen to over 100 by evacuees, had been locked up in the small village hall for a month, and their homes had been vandalized.
Generally, for the first couple of weeks, they left us alone. They were outside the settlement, and other than requisitioning a few vehicles and generally sort of imposing a few rules and regulations, it wasn't too bad.
Well, that all changed when the Harriers attacked.
Yeah, the first Harrier attack, I think it was on the 2nd of May. They seemed to sort of get very scared. They came into the settlement and took us from all our houses, and they sort of herded us over to the social club, the recreation hall.
And what did they do with you when you got there?
Well, they, to start with, they hadn't told us why we were going there. Some people were told you're going there for a meeting, I'd be assumed, to discuss what had happened and what was going to happen to us. Other people were told nothing, we were just taken out at gunpoint. I didn't know until sort of the manager, Eric Goss, come to me and said, we all got to go to the hall. I said, why? He said, he's no idea. He's no idea. I said, well, do you want me to take food? He said, no, I don't think it'll be necessary. You might just be there a couple of hours.
But you were there for 30 days?
Yes.
The first time the Harrier came over and struck the airstrip up here, they rushed in and dragged us out just as we were. It wasn't long out of bed, so I just had my shoes on, just a shirt. I couldn't get a coat or boots or anything like that. And we come out at gunpoint and went down to the hall. It was very frightening because when they drug us out by the shoulder, they took us out here and there was people on the knees with the rifles aimed at us, about 8 or 10, I suppose. And they'd march along to the next house and stop you. It was very frightening, really.
We had no idea it would be a month we'd be there. They just told us they was taking us down there for the day or something, after, in case there was another raid came on for our safety, and because they just kept us there. They never let us outside the door. I think it was for 9 days.
Terrible. I never want to live through that again.
What was the worst time?
In the hall, when we was underneath the floor, when the Harriers came over, to get the big guns down the point. I thought we'd had it, I really thought that was our end.
You were actually under the floor of the hall?
We was under the floor. We'd been living in the hall for a month. But during that time, we'd dug like 3 escape holes underneath the floor. And we all went down there. Well, most of us with the children took the children underneath while the heavy bombardment was going on.
They tied my hands, and then with the remainder of the strap, they tied my feet. So when I moved my feet, I jerked my wrist as well, which was very painful.
And how long were you tied up like that for?
For the whole period of the day, when the battle was on, the actual day of the battle this was. And for that whole period from about 9:30 in the morning until I would have thought around about 6:30 in the evening.
And did they do anything else to you?
During that time, one of the fellow who was guarding me in there, because I had a guard all the time, he pointed a rifle at my head, and he said a few words in Spanish. I didn't understand him, and I thought, well, if I tried to say something little Spanish I knew, I'd only complicate things. So I kept very quiet. He poked the gun right in my ear. I felt the barrel of the gun, and I thought, this is it. He's going to shoot me. I couldn't do anything. My hands were tied, my feet were tied. So I just kept still, and he withdrew the gun to my relief. And there was shelling going right around, very, very noisy. The rockets going off above my head. At one occasion, a bullet come through the wall above me, and the lead dropped down alongside.
It must have been a tremendously frightening experience to be tied up like that with a battle going on around you.
Oh, terrific, yeah. It was 3 times during that incident that I thought my days were numbered, and I said a little prayer. And especially lying in a tin shed in the same level as all the guns and no protection whatsoever. There was rockets dropping, 1 bomb dropped, and the dust come right in the shed rocked, and I was lying face down on the floor, so I got it all in the mouth. And it was very, very close, and as I say, these bullets come through the side of the shed.
And all this because they thought you had a radio?
Yes, they thought I had a radio, which they should have known it was impossible. They took everything from us.
They've taken a lot of stuff out of our homes. Some of the stuff's over at Port St. Carlos, so I've heard. Pretty bad, really. It's more like a pigsty on a house. It's just in a terrible mess where they've been walking in with their muddy boots on and
Oh,
I found live bullets and dead bullets, and dozens and dozens of books that don't belong to us, and Kenny's shirt cut up, and another one just as it...
Cut up?
Yes, cut up in pieces.
Oh.
Just in your brand new shirt. Well, it's just all sorts in there. You just wouldn't believe.
They just took it out.
Just everything
They've
you
just
can
taken it
mention.
out. They've went through it all. They've walked all over it, destroyed it, and then threw it all back in the cupboards again.
That's just what they did. I was 14 days without my teeth.
Yes, in the hall.
They took my teeth and stowed them away. I only found them yesterday. My life's that sore now that well, it's just like starting all over with new teeth. And I've got so sore in the hole, and then it healed up, and now I've got my teeth back.
What happened when the paratroopers came in at the very end? Did you see them?
Yeah. Well, we only seen them when they come into settlement. We've seen some of them coming over that hill over there. And we heard about them being up the airstrip and that.
Tell us what you saw. Just describe it for us.
Well, we saw black dots over there coming over the hill marching, and we saw two people coming down, soldiers coming down from the airstrip. We saw all of the Argentines getting marched away after they'd surrendered. It was quite good, really.
I bet you were pleased to see them, weren't you?
Yeah.
What did you think?
Well, I thought it was great.
Oh, that was great. That was wonderful. We all ran down the green to meet them, you know. The kids were taking down fountain biscuits and things, you know. It was lovely. I still feel a bit worried in case we get another air attack, you know, from the Argies, but it's nice to see our men around, smashing.
What you going to do now? Any thoughts about leaving the island?
Oh, definitely not. No. I couldn't leave here now after what these people have done for us. No way. It's our home. We were born here. It's our right. And I love these islands. I don't want to leave.
My first impression was leave, go, you know. But when you've realised what they've done from Britain to help us, no way would I shift now. This is my country and I'm staying here.
The importance of Goose Green lay not just in its position, but in the small grass airstrip, which served as a base for the Pucara aircraft. They could have been used to attack the British flank. Several damaged Pucaras had been abandoned. They're for use against troops on the ground, designed and made by the Argentinians, cheap and effective. Nobody was sure if they were safe or booby-trapped.
Basic standard warning panel, basic SWP.
The same worry applied to the guns and ammunition strewn all round the village. Bullets crunched like shingle underfoot. Later, 3 prisoners were to die moving ammunition, which was either unstable or booby-trapped.
They've been using armour-piercing ammunition, which is a blue top one.
The worst problem was getting rid of the napalm containers, which had been left filled in the centre of the village. Napalm tanks dropped from the Pucaras would lay down a curtain of fire. It eats up the oxygen, killing by asphyxiation. But if it lands on you, you'll burn alive. By now it had started oozing out onto the grass. The mixture was several days old, unstable, ready to go off with a good shake. It took several days for the experts to identify it, the conclusive evidence, a secret document showing how to fit the tanks to the Pucara.
The gelling agent is in here and here, and the fuse is in the nose here. So when you drop it from the aircraft, these lugs are pulled up here, one at each end, and the gelling agent is released into the tank with a kerosene or diesel, and on impact, the fuse is initiated, the tank explodes and it disintegrates and throws the napalm all over the place.
The garrison had plenty of equipment if they'd wished to fight on, but it was in poor condition. The rifles were rusty, and none of the prisoners had any cleaning equipment on them, something that baffled the professional British soldiers. The surrender ceremony had taken place on the recreation ground. There'd been a speech and the singing of the national anthem, greeted with little enthusiasm by the conscripts. There seemed little identity of purpose between them and their officers. When the British came to bury their dead, 11 of the 17 were officers or NCOs. The British way to take men to battle is to lead from the front, a tradition that Colonel Jones was following. He led his battalion from the front and died. There's talk that the colonel may be awarded a posthumous VC for his gallantry in a military action on which the official verdict from London was of unstinting praise.
The lives of the Falkland Islanders in that area are safe. 1,400 men in well-prepared positions were outfought by a magnificent battalion of some 600 parachutists. In my view, this is one of the most brilliant and courageous battalion actions which has been conducted since the end of World War II. And all of those of us in the armed forces salute to para.
Lieutenant Colonel Jones, Captain Wood, Captain Dent, Lieutenant Barry, Corporal Hardman, Corporal Sullivan, Corporal Fryer, Lance Corporal Cork, Lance Corporal Smith, Lance Corporal Bingley, Private Holman Smith, Private Fletcher, Private Illingsworth, Private Meakin, Private Dixon. From 3 Commando Brigade Air Squadron, Lieutenant Nunn. From 5-9 Commando Royal Engineers, Corporal Melia. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. In sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
The graves were on a small hillock overlooking San Carlos Bay, a quiet spot set aside well before anybody had died. The flanks secure, it was time to start moving on Port Stanley. All the heavy equipment, the guns and their ammunition, would need all the helicopters that were available. There was no other way to move it across ground that oozed with water. The men would have to walk. The climate was a crippling combination of cold and damp, something that would test their survival training to the limit. Already some men were beginning to suffer from trench foot, a sort of mild frostbite that would take them out of action for days or weeks. The Argentinians were relying on the mountains as a barrier. They stretched the full 50 miles, high and cold, from San Carlos to Port Stanley. There were no tracks. They'd never been needed before. The Argentinians assumed that the British would not attempt to come over the top in midwinter. But they miscalculated. That was the way the Marines and the Paras chose to go. Their packs weighed 50 to 60 pounds each. Around their waist they wore a webbing belt with survival equipment and ammunition, another 30 pounds. It took a fit man to carry that load.